The session is on immigration, and this is one that actually comes out of my work with the Workforce Committee. It's an area of which I have a tremendous interest in. I feel very strongly for the American worker, especially the American engineers, and when I see on the television the aspects of any of our engineers being displaced by some temporary visa from some foreign country coming in, it just doesn't set quite right. And so in terms of the immigrations, I've asked for a panel of people that have worked in the area. Everybody knows David North. David has been with the Department of Labor as an assistant in the Department of Labor. He has worked in the area quite a long time. He is currently retired. He's done a lot of research now with the Sloan Foundation. Am I right, David? You did retire.
No, I'm not retired.
Oh.
I have done work for the Sloan Foundation. I did work for the Labor Department. 2 out of 3 isn't bad this early in the morning.
Thank you. Okay. Well, at least we're going in the right direction. But David has written a book. Excuse me. And that book is the Soothing the Establishment, which really does talk about the impact of the foreign-born scientists on our engineering and science corps, okay? I think it's important that we listen to the message as to how it's impacting our future. We also have Wooty Sixel. Wooty is from the Houston Chronicle. She's been calling our Workforce Committee. Wooty, let me see if I can find it, Wooty, please, so I can not make any mistakes. But she is a business reporter and a columnist with the Houston Chronicle. She's gotten her degree from Wisconsin-Madison, the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Her master's degree is from the School of Economics and Political Science in London. And so she specializes in the British labor history, and hopefully in the future it'll be the American labor history. But she has written quite a few columns that deal with the immigration problem and its impact on our workforce. And those that were at the last year's conference will also remember that Edith Holleman delivered quite a hard presentation, which I think was quite popular and right to the point. And again, Edith, let me go to the right page so I don't say something wrong. But Edith has been with the House Senate Committee as one of the individuals there. At the present time, she is in the Industrial Union Department of the AFL-CIO in the Washington, D.C. area. She is a graduate of Waco University, I'd like you to know, from the Baylor School, as I mentioned last year. And let's see, what else? She has her law degree from George Washington University. And so, again, Edith has been in the games of watching what happens to the engineering, science, technology for quite a bit, and is now presently solidly involved in the immigration. The message I think that we're going to hear is we need to take action now, not wait a year or two and plan and do other things, but there is immediate need that needs to take place. The immigration reforms are very subtle, very quiet. It's a type of issue that most politicians do not want to get involved with. And with that, I don't want to take any more thunder from our presenters. I'll start with David North, who will lead off the session. Wooty Sixel will follow, and then the anchor woman will be Edith Holleman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I enjoyed being with you again as I was in Portland. It's nice to be in a part of the world where they actually make things and grow things. And I'm reminded that in the town I work, Washington, D.C., there is one factory, and that's the government printing office. I want to do 3 things today. I want to sort of define some of the streams of foreign-born scientists and engineers that we're concerned about. It's not a monolithic situation, and I want to talk a little bit about the two different streams that are important. I want to talk about ask some questions really about the rationale for the amount of money that we're spending on foreign-born students in science and engineering in our colleges and universities. And finally, I want to talk about some things that can be done about the abuses in one of the streams, what I call the immigrant stream, which I'll define in a moment. And then I'll leave to the other two speakers to talk about what should be done about the non-immigrant stream, which is, I think, a more troublesome one. I have just finished a multi-year piece of research for the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation that resulted in this book called Soothing the Establishment. The reason for the title, the rationale behind the title, is that the presence of large numbers of generally very bright and very well-educated foreign-born scientists and engineers, particularly at the graduate level, i.e. with masters and PhDs, is essentially soothing to the American establishment. It's soothing in the sense that there are enough of them to kind of keep wages in check, shall we say. Furthermore, because of the easy availability of this population at the master's and graduate and PhD level, there's no particular pressure on the American establishment to reach out to women, to blacks and Hispanics to come into these occupations, again, at that level. But let me talk about the two streams that I've mentioned before, because I think this is an important distinction, and it plays on what needs to be done as far as policy is concerned. The two streams I call the immigrant stream and the non-immigrant stream. A non-immigrant is somebody who comes to this country temporarily. It's not a stationary person. It's a non-immigrant is a term of art in the immigration business. The immigrant stream works something like this. There are some people who come to this country to practice engineering and science who already have their degrees. That's kind of the exception. We saw a lot of this with Russian astronomers and Russian physicists, mathematicians a few years ago. But that's unusual. What typically happens is somebody gets a bachelor's degree in science or engineering overseas. They do above average. They do very well in their institutions. Then they come to the United States or Canada for an additional degree, either a master's or a master's and a PhD. They tend to get good educations in North American graduate institutions, and then many of them stay. The number is maybe it's 50%, maybe it's 60%, but many of them stay in the United States and Canada. And then they go through, whereas they came in as foreign students, and I'm going to try to avoid as much of the alphabet soup as possible, but they come in with temporary visas to be foreign students, F visas or J visas. Then they often convert to an H visa, which is a temporary worker visa, and then eventually they move on, if they decide to stay and an employer decides to hire them, to green card or immigrant status. That's the flow. People are coming in one at a time, which I think is important. They're getting through some interesting barriers. They're accepted by graduate schools. They're ultimately hired either by a university or a corporation. The Immigration Service just sort of gives a blank stamp to anybody who comes to any piece of paper that comes to them from an American university or an American corporation. That's a bit of an overstatement, but as Wooty will tell you, not much. But they come in one at a time, and after they've been here for a while and have an American education, they have more ability to take care of themselves, and engineers and scientists don't take care of themselves very well as far as economic advocacy is concerned. But these folks are better off than the people in the next category. The next category are the people in what I call the non-immigrant stream. They're here temporarily. They come in bunches. They often come from India or China. They're recruited often to be programmers or junior engineers, but often computer programmers. And they come in large chunks, often to replace American workers who've been laid off. This is a more disturbing element in this scene than the immigrant path that I've been talking about. These are not exceptional folks. They have not been through the screening process that the people in the immigrant stream have been through. They haven't taken GREs. They haven't done well with graduate school admissions classes. They've simply been hired because they're plausible, competent programmers brought here in bunches and paid badly and proceed to depress wages and working conditions for other people, including other immigrants and resident Americans. And that's the non-immigrant stream. That's the one we saw about on 60 Minutes, 48 Hours, two different TV shows that dealt with this. This is a very real problem, and but it's a different problem than the other one. Let me come back to the question of the education of the foreign-born in science and engineering, particularly graduate education. As many of you know, the incidence of the foreign students rises as the degree rises. There's a much higher percentage at the PhD level and the master's level, higher level at the master's level and at the BA level. Many, many more in engineering than, say, in the life sciences, biology, botany, and a kind of a middle level at in the physical sciences, physics and math. But there's a lot of activity in this immigrant stream at the PhD level in engineering. So let's talk a little bit about why, or ask some questions really, about what the U.S. social purpose is in having such extensive use of U.S. technical education for the foreign-born. Is it noblesse oblige, a sense that we should extend our technical expertise to those nations with a need for it? Can we afford this approach? If so, why permit the alien recipients of this training to stay in the country? If your objective is to train them to go back home and make it a better world, many of them stay in this country. Is the objective to train overseas technical managers in our systems so that they will go back home, buy our equipment, buy our systems, think in ways that are friendly to the way we think? And if that's our objective, then why let so many of them stay? Is the objective, I have an answer to this ultimately, is the objective to capture the best talent in the world, train it at our expense, and keep it here? In that case, why let so many of them get away? Is it to use the graduate school, or is it to use graduate students as cheap intellectual labor to do the contract research and keep the graduate schools around as comfortable institutions? And I think that's sort of become part of it. What I really think is happening is that this is a phenomenon that's sort of happened, that serves various individual alien and U.S. institutional purposes, and it continues more or less as a matter of momentum than one of conscious social policy. All of this is like an aircraft carrier charging off at 30 knots. Well, you decide that you want to turn around. Well, that takes a while just to get the thing stopped, much less turned around. And that's what we have here. And there's a lot of momentum involved, a lot of egos involved, a lot of systems that are served by this. And in many cases, there are a whole series of individual decisions that are made that are totally rational as far as that individual or that institution is concerned. But when you look at the totality, it's not rational for society. And so there's this big aircraft carrier charging ahead, and it will take a long time to slow it down or turn it around. And I'm concerned about that. We've been reading that the number of incoming PhD candidates in physics has dropped for something like the second or third straight year, both foreign and domestic. But it'll be another 2 or 3 years before there will be a smaller number of people getting PhDs in physics, because this is such a long process and it's such a slow process. And I might add, an expensive process. And essentially, most of the big research universities, the Ivy Leagues, the big state universities, a PhD in science and engineering is funded by U.S. sources. And so one of the attractions of people coming to this country is that they know that A, they'll get a terrific degree if they stick it out, B, it'll be at Uncle Sam's expense one way or another, and at the end of it, they will can either go back home with a terrific worldwide credential, or they can get a green card to stay here. So there's a lot of attractions, and the people who are responding to that are responding intelligently as far as their own interests are concerned. What should we do about this very quickly? I've paid some attention to immigration issues and labor market issues, and nuanced arrangements don't work. The immigration bar figures out the nuances and beats the system. You've got to use really crude techniques to do this. Now, one of the problems is that it's useful for our society generally to have at least some segment of the immigrant flow being able and well-educated people. And if you just simply say, no, nobody else should come in with a college education, suddenly you'll find that the flow of immigrants may not be changed very much, but the level of education on average will be reduced severely. So that's a problem as you look at this thing from the point of view of defending jobs for U.S.-born and legal immigrant engineers. Anyway, the answers need to be simple and direct. I think you should reduce funding of U.S. education at the graduate level of foreign-born scientists and engineers. You should channel, the money should not be channeled as it largely is now through research grants. It should be channeled through direct stipends, fellowships and scholarships to individuals, and then you have some control over what percentage of those folks are born overseas. That's not now true. Most of the money goes through research grants, and the professor decides, not some government system. Secondly, there used to be an active requirement in the exchange program. This is a non-immigrant program, required after you came here that you had to go back to where you came from for a couple of years before you converted to immigrant status. The notion being, well, if they had come here, if we were trying to be helpful to the rest of the world, they ought to spend at least 2 years back in their home country. We need to restore that and make that much more widespread than it is now. It's chock full of exceptions, and I'll talk to anybody about it later, kind of outside this room, because it gets to be a little complicated. I think we should reduce the number of labor certifications that are issued, and I think we should, quite frankly, slap on a $10,000, $15,000 fee for every one of them, and the employers will sort of notice. Hopefully they will notice, and they will start paying some attention to recruiting Americans, and there are plenty of able Americans to do this sort of work. As to what to do about the non-immigrant stream, I leave that to my colleagues, and I turn the mic back to our chair.
Shortly after I joined the Houston Chronicle, I got a telephone call from the AFL-CIO in Austin. And they were really upset because an employer in Corpus Christi, Texas, had requested 150 welders from Mexico to come and work on a project. And the AFL-CIO was upset, not only because there are thousands of unemployed welders around the country, but the employer only wanted to pay the wage of $8 an hour. Well, while the union contended the prevailing wage was more like $15 an hour. So the union didn't know what to do, and finally they settled on the solution of having every single welder that was a member of the union send in an application to the Labor Department saying that they'd be willing to take those jobs. And the Labor Department was overwhelmed. They didn't know what to do, and so it ended up where the employer had to cancel his order for the Mexican welders because they didn't want to weed through all those applications from U.S. welders. And so So my curiosity was piqued, and I wondered how an employer went about trying to bring in immigrants to the United States to have them work jobs. So I started looking into the program and found that there are two main types of immigration programs, for permanent workers as well as temporary workers. And I turned my attention first to the permanent workers. And those are the, can everyone hear me? I have a funny echo up here and I was a little worried. Well, before an employer can hire a permanent, to hire an alien permanently, they have to search the U.S. labor market and find out if there is a U.S. worker who can take the job. And so I got 3 years of data electronically from the Labor Department and on all the applications that employers had filed in Texas over a 3-year period to find out who they were bringing in. And I got it electronically, put it into our computers at the Houston Chronicle, and found that 99% of the time, the employers were able to convince the Labor Department that there were no U.S. workers who could take the jobs. Only 1% of the time, actually less than 1% of the time, the employer was denied the application because the Labor Department felt that there was a U.S. worker who could fit the bill. In some of these cases, more than 100 people had applied for these jobs. And yet the Labor Department ruled that there were no U.S. workers who were eligible, or who were able to do the work. Some of so I took a closer look. Once I got the electronic data, I started looking into the files, individual files for the companies, and found that employers were able to tailor-make their applications. In one case, there was a request to bring in an alien for a big computer hardware company in Austin, and it was for a financial analyst job. It paid $27,000 a year. Well, the employer had the requirements of 8 particular college classes. And one of the applicants, he was a University of Michigan graduate, seemed to be quite well qualified, but since he had been to Michigan in the mid-'80s, they didn't have an international studies class, so he wasn't able to have that class, and so he was disqualified as a result of that. I also found that about 98% of the time, the alien was already working in the job when the U.S. workers were recruited. So there was every reason in the world for the employer to want to keep the person that they've already got working. So the U.S. applicants were systematically disqualified. I also found that the workers were being paid less than what the employer had promised the Labor Department that they would pay. Under the rules in the Labor Department, the employer has to pay a prevailing wage of 95% of the typical wage for that job, which is kind of an interesting concept because the employers get a 5% discount for hiring an alien. But I found an employer in the Houston area that promised the Labor Department it would pay $8 an hour, but when I started talking to the workers, it turned out that they were only getting about $5 an hour. And I think those kind of stories aren't too terribly uncommon. The problem is that nobody is checking. The INS has a responsibility of checking to see if the wages are actually paid that the employer promises the Labor Department, but they don't have the resources, and so it just goes by the wayside. I should have mentioned up front that the way that the employer goes about getting an alien is they file something called the labor application to the Labor Department, and then the Labor Department evaluates whether there are U.S. workers who can fit who are available, who can do the job. And if they find no U.S. worker who can do the job, then the application's approved, and then the employer goes to the Immigration and Naturalization Service for a visa. So another startling part about the series of stories was that when I would call the U.S. workers who had applied for those jobs, they had no idea what was going on. They were stunned that there was already someone in the job when they had applied. And some of them were really disturbed about it. I remember one fellow, he heard about the job. He was over at the Employment Commission, and they told him that there was this perfect job that would really fit him. So he he spent $10 to get an overnight letter to the employer with his resume, and it was so the employers, the employees that I talked to really felt as if they were victimized, because here they put up a good faith effort, they were unemployed, they were looking for work, and then to find out that they're really not wanted. Then I turned my attention to the temporary visa program that the U.S. government runs. That's a program in which an employer can request 1 or 100 or as many as actually as 5,000 employees. I think the number is actually unlimited, the number of employees that they can request under this temporary program. There was one application for 5,000 workers that was approved by the Labor Department. In that case, in those cases, the employee, the temporary alien, can come in to work for as many as 6 years. There's not the labor market test that exists in the permanent program. All an employer does is file a request with the Labor Department asking for X number of workers, promises to pay the prevailing wage, and then the Labor Department has a week or two in which to approve the application. I specifically looked at computer programmers in that case, because a lot of body shops bring in programmers from other countries, principally India and the Philippines, and they bring in hundreds at a time. And I talked to U.S. workers who are getting displaced as a result of it. They're working in places, big computer shops, and all of a sudden their contracts come up and they don't get renewed, and then they find that a body shop has brought in a lot of folks from a foreign country. They're also seeing their wages decline, because a lot of times the net effect has been that the aliens are often working for lower wages. In fact, there's been some Labor Department action trying to going after wage violations because the employers are not paying the prevailing wage. In the research that I did, I found that there was virtually no oversight by the Department of Labor. And if the employer says that the prevailing wage is $10 an hour, well, that's what they approve the application for. And it's a complaint-driven system, so unless someone complains, then nobody investigates. In fact, there was one case in which a kind of a rogue programmer, he put in a request for 20 programmers for $5 an hour, and the Labor Department approved that. And you all know that programmers don't earn $5 an hour. Well, he was I think pretty startled by that, and he put in a request then for $4.35 an hour, the minimum wage, and by God, that got approved too. So. The employers that I talked to, they contend there's not enough good programmers out there. They've got to bring in these folks from the Philippines and from India, and that's been their argument. But the workers say that it's eroding their wages and their working conditions. That it's a continuous circle. That there's the increased competition, the wages go down, and all of a sudden they're displaced, and so they're really having a hard time, the computer programmers. I also took a look at what's going on at the universities. The universities are really upset these days because it used to be that they could bring in researchers and pay them low wages. And the reason why they could do that was because when they would check the prevailing wage, the universities could survey other universities. And since all universities pay low wages, well, you can kind of guess what the wages would be when the surveys came out. They were always low. Well, there was a court case recently in which it was ruled that nonprofit organizations could no longer just survey other nonprofit organizations. They had to survey the entire community for the prevailing wage in the community. So the Department of Labor extended that then to universities and ruled that universities no longer could just survey other universities when they're checking wages. They also have to talk to the Exxons, the Shells, the General Motors, and the Martin Mariettas of the world. Well, universities just were so upset by this because this would boost their wage rates. And in fact, Johns Hopkins University said that in some cases their wages, the prevailing wage went up as much as 93%. But I talked to a fella in Houston who he was really excited about this. Aliens are generally not excited. They're nervous to talk about their wages because they're here, they're working here at the pleasure of the employer. And 2 minutes? Okay. I'm glad you're here, Charles. And he was told that he would get a raise of $5,000. Well, he was really excited about this, but the this was at a Texas school, and so he was really excited about his $5,000 raise. But then the employer fought it and tried to reclassify the position to try to make it a lower level, and then they also apparently also investigating the possibility of changing his status so he'd be an outstanding scholar. So then they could escape those provisions. So in the end, I think he's only going to get about $500 more than he had initially thought. I put copies of my stories in the back. They're not very fancy, but since everyone's, I thought they'd be a little easier to read. They missed the fancy graphics and the pictures, but it's a little easier. Thank you.
Thank you, Woody. Did you distribute this?
Yeah, they're in the back.
Woody has brought up a very interesting point in that the Labor Department uses the certification officer, the alien certification officer, to look over all these forms, and the Workforce Committee of USAB has implemented, or quite a while ago, an assist to the Labor Department. The intent is to get the section closest to that Labor Department to assist if the Labor Department asked you to assist in evaluating a form. I didn't think the program was working, and I received a fax from the Dallas Department of Labor in which 22 forms were faxed to me of bringing in 22 computer programmers at one time. The qualifications were you had to have a BS degree, be able to use DOS, be able to use Windows, and that was for 18 of the people. That what they were certifying is that we had no Americans qualified to do that. The extension went on that the next requirement at a much higher level was that you had to program C, and that was it. And so I sent it around to Harb Hare, which you remember, he's very active in that area. He wrote a rebuttal. I sent it to Gene Eason. Gene Eason from the Fort Worth section, I'm sure, wrote a rebuttal, and I wrote a rebuttal, and sure enough, the net result, I believe, was that either 18 or 20 of the 22 forms were actually rejected. 2 were passed. That's step one at the local level. In other words, the Dallas Department of Labor. Step 2 is when it goes to Washington and 99% are turned around. So that means that in reality, maybe 1 will not be accepted. Just want to let you know, we need to work on the problem, but also it means that you, the PACE chairs, if you're interested in this problem, please contact one of your representatives from the Workforce Committee. Bill Nappy gave an excellent presentation last year in which he was calling for help from the different sections, and we do need your help. I think it's a very important issue. Let me continue on. I do want to have some time for Q&A, and if we run over 10 minutes, no problem, because we have a 30-minute break. So with that, Edith, please.
I'm the one from Washington. I've been working with the American Engineering Association on the immigration issue and have been doing some lobbying on Capitol Hill. I know this is a difficult topic for a lot of us because many of you are immigrants or you work with immigrants who've contributed a great deal to your company and to the economy. But regardless of that, wherever we come from, now we're all Americans, and we have a commitment to this economy and to its well-being. Currently, about 9% of our population is foreign-born. This is the highest percentage it's been since World War II and double what it was in 1970. And I'm including both legal and illegal immigrants in that number. It's important to note that immigration has increased despite the passage by Congress of 2 immigration reform laws, one in 1986 and one in 1990, both of which were designed to restrict immigration. One of the increases that has resulted from the 1990 bill, however, is in skilled and employment-related immigration. In 1987, Congress started the H-1B program that Wooty has been referring to. This is a temporary program for skilled workers. People sometimes call it the techno-coolie program or the techno-bracero program. These are people who are basically guest workers. In 1990, Congress, responding to false predictions of a science and engineering shortage, greatly expanded the number of immigrants that could enter under permanent employment-related visas. They expanded it from 54,000 to 140,000. From 1990 to 1993, using the figures from the Immigration and Naturalization Service and the Labor Department, Larry Richards of SoftPac, who is that's basically a group that represents contract computer programmers, found out that U.S. engineering schools awarded 2 bachelor's degrees for every job opening created through net replacement. At the same time, engineering unemployment doubled, and the total number of engineering jobs declined by 135,000. During that time, the U.S. admitted over 40,000 immigrant engineers and 100,000 on temporary work permits to meet alleged labor shortages. You know, one of the problems is Congress declared a labor shortage whether there was one or not. And that's what stands behind these laws. The labor market for engineers in 1995 is better than it's been for quite some time, particularly for young people who have good software skills. Last year, for example, the American Association of Engineering Societies reported that 40% of the jobs found by University of Virginia bachelor level graduates were positions as programmers or systems analysts. Unemployment overall has dropped for engineers, and new jobs have been created. Salaries, however, are flat at almost all levels of experience. The average salary for an engineer with 25 years of experience is $68,625, not even double the average starting salary of $35,350. Graduating MBAs from the top schools can make more in the first year than an engineer with 20 or 30 years of experience. Some people blame the high level of engineering immigration together with a growing number of engineers available in other countries and the outsourcing of work to engineers in other countries for depressing the wage levels. Andy Groves, who's the head of Intel, and by the way, Intel is the leading sponsoring company of permanent immigrants. Groves is always good for a good soundbite, and he was recently quoted as having said, "Engineering PhDs are a commodity. I can get them for 10 cents on the dollar in India." In any one year, 6 Asian countries produce 250,000 engineers to the U.S. 65,000, and more developing countries are establishing new schools every day. A recent study by the RAND Corporation, which was publicized in the last couple of weeks, determined that doctoral production in the U.S. has no relationship to job demand, but is based on professors' needs for graduate students to do their research. The result is, as the chairman of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Science and Engineering and Public Policy so delicately put it, delays in employment rather than true unemployment. You probably won't be surprised to hear that this committee declined recently to study the impact of foreign scientists and engineers on the domestic labor market. This year, Congress hopes to complete yet another overhaul of the immigration laws to reduce legal immigration. There's a couple small organizations that are attempting to have Congress take another look at employment-based immigration and short-term work permits, particularly as it relates to scientists and engineers. And that SoftPAC that I've already mentioned to you is representing the computer programmers, American Engineering Society, which is heavily leans towards contract engineers, and the National Association of Computer and Consultant Businesses, which is also, it's a temporary agency that hires mostly U.S. programmers. That's it. Those are the only people, these very, very small groups. Only one of them has a full-time person in Washington. The other ones are all volunteers. It's the position of these groups that since the 1990 increases in employment-based immigration were based on false assumptions and predictions of shortages that never materialized, that the numbers should be reduced to the 1990 level or less. Since 1993, the national media has run numerous exposés on the use by large multinational companies of thousands of temporary non-immigrant engineers and computer programmers under the H-1B program to replace and put on the unemployment line skilled American workers. And you've probably seen in the press and on television the incidents with Sealand. Sealand replaced over 200 computer programmers with programmers from the Philippines. AIG, which is a huge insurance company, replaced theirs with programmers from India. These people were required to train their replacements, and in the example of the Sealand programmers, they are actually going to go back to the Philippines with this work. This is all done with the approval of our own immigration laws. There's nothing in the immigration law today that says that you can't fire an American worker and bring in a temporary foreign worker. These guest workers are indentured to the employer who hires them. You cannot work for any other employer. I've seen some of the contracts for one of the largest companies, and it basically says if you don't carry out this contract, we'll take all your money away, we'll charge you your transportation costs, and we might even take your kids. These people are often underpaid, and one result has been a depression of wages for domestic contract programmers. IBM in Austin, Texas was able to cut the hourly pay of its U.S. contract programmers by $10 an hour by replacing those who refused to take the pay cut with H-1Bs. H-1B visas are not person-specific. There's no need for the employer to demonstrate an inability to find an American worker to do the work or to show any kind of a shortage. Approximately 20,000 of the 65,000 H-1Bs available every year go to universities. And these are ones that do not go in groups, they go one at a time, mostly for postdoctoral researchers or beginning professors. Again, all the employer has to do is fill out the paperwork, and these people can join the American workforce for as long as 6 years. The ineffectiveness of the labor certification process for permanent employment-based immigration is well documented. 99%, 98%, depending on the state. These are all done by running ads, always geared to the resume of the person who already has the job. And if you're unemployed and you start reading ads very carefully, you can tell which ads not to apply for. When they tell you what courses to take in what sequence, you can have a pretty good guess that this is a wired job and a wired ad. The plight of young U.S. scientists who cannot obtain employment in their fields at the same time foreign graduate students are receiving work permits has also been well documented. The Jordan Commission on Immigration Reform, which is, it's sort of interesting. Congress is going to reform the immigration law, and the final report from the Jordan Commission is not due until next year. has recommended a reduction in employment-based immigration from 140,000 to 100,000. Less than 100,000 skilled immigrants come in under the employment-based program, even though the level allowed is 140,000. So it appears that, as loose as it is, there's not that much demand. The Jordan Commission has suggested that all skilled immigrants come in with either 7 years of experience if they are skilled workers without college degrees, and if they have college degrees or higher, that they be required to have 5 years of experience. The Congress in this, in the bill that's being proposed now in the House, has changed that. The 5 years of experience is only required for people who come in with a baccalaureate. For people who come in with a master's or a PhD, no experience is required. And since the vast majority of engineers come in with advanced degrees, it will have no impact on the engineering immigration. I think when the groups that I'm working with went to Capitol Hill, we were really surprised to see that no one was interested in talking about employment-based immigration. You know, there's a big anti-immigrant fervor running around Capitol Hill these days. It doesn't extend to employment-based immigration. I had the chief immigration staffer of a California congressman who's rabid on this subject tell me that young Americans are lazy, stupid, uneducated, and they need to be protected from unskilled immigration. Those who are skilled can always get other jobs. They don't need any protection, and we should do nothing for them. And I thought it was a little strange, since he came from a state of numerous unemployed aerospace engineers and computer programmers, and a state that has a significant influx of immigrant skilled workers. A number of the new Republican staff don't know how labor certification works. They don't know what the H-1B program is. To date, the action has been on the House side in the Judiciary Immigration Subcommittee, chaired by Lamar Smith from Texas, and they tinkered around the edges. They won't talk about numbers. The main impact of their work is going to be to give immigration lawyers more tricks to play. I already mentioned that the baccalaureate degree experience is only required in the baccalaureate degree area, and they did add the restriction that skilled workers also have to have experience. In the H-1B program, the most significant change was a requirement that no American workers be displaced by H-1B visa holders unless the H-1B was paid 110% of the prevailing wage. On the other hand, the Labor Department's right to initiate its own investigations of abuses without a complaint was eliminated. As Wooty mentioned, these are complaint-driven laws, and the Labor Department had decided to initiate some of their own investigations, and that has now been taken away. On the Senate side, well, when it comes to reducing numbers, you can't even have a discussion. Off the record, we've been told that the coalition of the opposition, which is made up of universities and multinational corporations, is too powerful. The universities are often represented by the foreign student offices, and they have a dual interest. They want more foreign students to fill their classrooms, and the foreign students' offices offer the inducement of a green card in exchange for a U.S. degree. The multinationals want lower salaries, as a recent Wall Street Journal article reported, and they want the ability to recruit and move people around worldwide. Neither of these groups feel comfortable testifying in public about their position and being cross-examined about their commitment to American students. They do their lobbying outside of the hearing room and in the press. Recently, the Washington Post ran an article on the H-1B program saying that this country's ability to compete globally in scientific research would be damaged if the Labor Department ruling on the prevailing wage, which Wooty referred to, was allowed to stand. The subcommittee made the legislative fix without a public discussion. The Senate Immigration Subcommittee, which is controlled by Senator Simpson from Wyoming, has not started their hearings yet. And they told me last week that they're going to hold a separate hearing on science and engineering issues as it relates to immigration. All of us are a little cynical at this point, and we'll believe that there's going to be a hearing when we see it. The staff, however, has told us that they're facing the same coalition that everyone else is facing, which is the universities and the multinationals, and that they're very, very powerful. I think to us, the basic issue is broader than H-1Bs or temporary workers or even employment-based immigration allowances. We have to really decide how we want our money spent. There are lots of cuts in education, lots of cuts in job training, and yet we continue to fund foreign students with taxpayer funds to come here and to stay here and take jobs that would otherwise go to American students and American workers. We have to decide as a society if this is what we want to do. That debate has not occurred. It's a debate that needs to be held, and it's a debate that, frankly, groups like IEEE should be furthering. You know, I talked about who's working on these immigration issues, and I will tell you honestly that we are very small, and we are really nothing and nobody. IEEE is not in this debate. You represent the engineers, you represent the computer programmers, and I think you need to ask yourself why you're not in this debate and what you're going to do about it.